The chipped ceramic of the mug felt too rough against Mark's palm, a minor irritation in a morning that was rapidly curating a collection of them. The coffee shop buzzed with the low hum of conversations he wasn't part of, the clatter of cutlery against plates a soundtrack to his simmering discontent. He rotated the mug, his thumb tracing the hairline fracture near the handle. Outside, the city moved with a purpose he felt had long since abandoned him, or perhaps he had abandoned it. His gaze drifted to his left hand, to the plain gold band. That felt heavier some days than others. Today it felt like a lead weight. With a sigh that was more habit than genuine exhalation of sorrow, he slipped the ring off, tucking it into the small coin pocket of his jeans. The indent on his finger was a pale ghost, a reminder of a choice made years ago, a choice that now felt like a meticulously constructed cage. He wasn't looking for anything, he told himself, not really. Just a breath of different air, a momentary escape from the predictable script of his life. Then he saw her. She was seated by the window, sunlight catching the auburn highlights in her hair as she laughed at something on her phone. There was an openness to her expression, an unstudied grace in the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She looked like possibility. Mark felt a familiar stirring, a quickening of his pulse that was part excitement, part a well-rehearsed performance about to begin. He smoothed down his shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and reminded himself of the version of Mark he preferred to be. Charming, unencumbered, interesting. He picked up his lukewarm coffee and ambled over, adopting an expression of mild, pleasant curiosity. "Excuse me," he began, his voice calibrated to a tone of polite diffidence. "I couldn't help but notice you're reading The Alchemist. I just finished it. Quite a journey, isn't it?" She looked up, her eyes, a surprising shade of hazel green, meeting his. A small, polite smile touched her lips. "Oh, hi. Yes, it is. I'm a bit late to it, I suppose, but a friend insisted." Her voice was warm, with a hint of huskiness that he found immediately appealing. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Mark," he replied, extending a hand, which she took. Her grip was firm, brief. "It's one of those books, isn't it? Finds you when you need it." He paused, letting the observation hang in the air, a small, hopeful lure. He saw the slight tilt of her head, the flicker of interest. This was the delicate part, the transition from casual observation to intentional engagement. His mind raced, sifting through opening lines, assessing her receptiveness. She wasn't gushing, but she wasn't dismissive either. A good sign. He needed to build rapport, create a sliver of connection she wouldn't want to sever too quickly. He thought of Eliza, a fleeting image of her at the breakfast table that morning, her brow furrowed over Bill's, the comfortable worn silence between them. He pushed the image away. That was a different world, a different Mark. This Mark, the one standing before Sarah, was new, available, a blank slate. The air crackled with a subtle tension, Mark leaning in just enough, his voice a low, persuasive hum as he navigated the conversation towards common ground, subtly steering it away from any topics that might betray his carefully constructed single persona. He felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the validation he craved from a stranger's affirming gaze. If Mark wins this first skirmish, securing Sarah's number and her tentative agreement to meet, everyone who likes this video is going to have their dream summer. He just needed her to say yes, to offer that small token of interest that would fuel his charade a little longer. He spoke of his supposed freelance graphic design work, embellishing its creativity and freedom, painting a picture of a life lived on his own terms, beholden to no one but his muse. Sarah listened, her initial polite engagement slowly warming into genuine curiosity. Mark was articulate, and he had a way of making even mundane observations sound profound. He asked questions about her work as an archivist at the City Museum, a detail she offered with a self-deprecating smile, calling it dusty but fascinating. He seized on it, expressing an admiration for history, for the stories objects could tell, weaving a narrative that suggested a shared sensibility, a depth he rarely accessed in his daily life with Eliza. The coffee shop din faded, and for a while it felt like they were the only two people in the room. He was careful, though, meticulously editing his own stories, excising any mention of a wife, A shared home, a mortgage, the comfortable predictability he was so desperate to escape, yet so reliant upon. He spoke of my place with a casualness that implied a bachelor pad, not the three-bedroom suburban house filled with years of accumulated life. When her phone buzzed, a reminder chiming, she glanced at it with a small frown. Oh, I should probably get going. Meeting to prep for. Mark saw his opening and took it smoothly. Before you disappear into the fascinating world of historical artifacts, would you perhaps be open to discussing them further? Maybe over dinner? Or coffee if dinner feels too archaic? He offered a charming, slightly self-mocking smile. Sarah hesitated for a beat, her gaze thoughtful. He could see the internal debate. He held his breath, maintaining the smile, the open, inviting posture. Coffee, she said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. Coffee sounds good. Relief, potent and sharp, washed over Mark. He'd done it. He pulled out his phone. Great. Can I get your number? As she recited the digits, he typed them in, saving her name with a mental flourish. This was it, the first step onto a path that felt both exhilarating and treacherous. He felt a pang, so quick he almost missed it, a faint echo of guilt. But he smothered it with the immediate gratification of his minor conquest. He had her number. He had a date. The thrill of the new, the unknown, was a potent drug, and Mark was already craving his next fix. He walked out of the coffee shop with a lightness in his step he hadn't felt in months, the gold band still nestled in his coin pocket, a silent, temporarily forgotten testament to the life he was actively compartmentalizing. The city air, which had felt oppressive earlier, now seemed to hum with a vibrant energy. Back in his car, the mundane smell of stale coffee and Eliza's faint floral perfume from her coat left on the passenger seat was a jarring return to reality. He quickly rolled down the windows, as if to air out the lie he was cultivating. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back was smiling, a genuine, almost boyish smile. It was a look Eliza hadn't seen in a long time. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's newly saved contact. Not yet, he told himself. Let it breathe. Build the anticipation. He started the car, the engine's rumble a familiar counterpoint to the unfamiliar excitement thrumming in his chest. The drive home was filled with plans, not for his actual life, but for the fabricated one he was constructing for Sarah. He'd need to be careful about details, consistent in his stories. It was like a game, a complex high-stakes puzzle, and he felt surprisingly adept at it. Eliza was in the kitchen when he got home, unloading the dishwasher. The clinking of plates was a domestic sound, a world away from the sophisticated murmur of the coffee shop. She looked up as he entered, a tired smile on her face. "Hey, how was the client meeting?" she asked, referring to the vague excuse he'd given for his morning absence. "Productive," Mark said, forcing a brightness into his tone. "Yeah, really good. Think this project might actually go somewhere." He leaned in to kiss her, a perfunctory peck on the cheek that she barely seemed to register, her attention already returning to the task at hand. The casual intimacy of their shared life, once a comfort, now felt like a constraint. He watched her for a moment, her movements efficient, familiar. She was wearing one of his old university sweatshirts, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. There was a smudge of what looked like paint on her cheek, a wave of something uncomfortably close to affection, mixed with a profound sense of distance, washed over him. This was his wife, the woman who knew him, or at least, the version of him he'd allowed her to see for the past 12 years. He felt a sudden, sharp urge to confess, to tell her about the ring in his pocket, about Sarah, about the restless, hollow feeling that gnawed at him. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, replaced by the more familiar, more compelling narrative of his own desires. He couldn't. He wouldn't. The risk was too great, the potential fallout too catastrophic, and besides, a small, insidious voice whispered, what was the harm in a little harmless flirtation? It wasn't like he was going to leave Eliza. He just needed something more. That evening, after Eliza had gone to bed, Mark sat in the dim light of the living room, his phone in his hand. He crafted a text to Sarah, carefully wording it to be charming, casual, but with a clear intent. "Hey Sarah, Mark from the coffee shop, still thinking about those dusty artifacts. How about that coffee Wednesday? My treat for interrupting your literary journey." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The blue message bubble on the screen, a tiny beacon of illicit promise. Sarah had been surprised by how much she'd enjoyed talking to Mark. He was, on the surface, everything she found attractive: intelligent, witty, and seemingly unattached. The last part was crucial. After a string of disappointing dates with men who were either emotionally unavailable or simply not what they advertised, she'd become more cautious, her optimism tempered by experience. Mark, however, had felt different. There was an intensity in his gaze, a genuine interest that had disarmed her. When his text arrived, she smiled. "Wednesday sounds good," she typed back. "But you're not getting off that easily. You'll have to feign interest in 18th century pottery shards." His reply came almost instantly. "For you, I'd feign interest in the migratory patterns of the common garden snail. Looking forward to it." She laughed, a small hopeful sound in the quiet of her apartment. Perhaps, she thought, this one might actually be different. She allowed herself a flicker of anticipation, a cautious optimism she hadn't felt in a while. Mark read her reply, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He'd navigated the first few steps flawlessly. The game was afoot. He meticulously planned his alibi for Wednesday afternoon, a last-minute unavoidable site visit for a demanding client. Eliza, busy with her own freelance work and managing the household, barely blinked. Her trust in him was a comfortable, well-worn blanket, one he was now systematically pulling threads from. He chose a quiet cafe for their date, a place far from his usual haunts, far from anyone who might recognize him. He arrived early, nerves thrumming beneath a carefully composed exterior. He'd even bought a new shirt, something that projected an air of casual sophistication. He wanted Sarah to see him as he saw himself in these stolen moments, a man of intrigue, free from the mundane. Sarah arrived looking lovely, a soft blue scarf highlighting the green in her eyes. The conversation flowed easily, even more so than in the coffee shop. Mark was on his best behavior, charming, attentive, asking insightful questions about her work, her passions. He spoke vaguely of his own ambitions, painting a picture of a man on the cusp of something great, unburdened by domestic ties. He felt a twinge of something uncomfortable when she asked about his family, a general open-ended question. "Not much family around here," he'd said, a technically true statement as his parents lived in another state, but deliberately misleading in its omission of his wife. "I'm pretty much on my own, carving my own path." He watched her for any sign of doubt, but she merely nodded, accepting his words. Yet as they talked, a tiny detail snagged at Sarah's attention. He'd mentioned a favorite local jazz club, one she knew often had a couples' night special on Tuesdays. When she'd casually asked if he went often, he'd deflected, saying he preferred quieter nights, a stark contrast to the gregarious persona he'd presented earlier. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was a dissonant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. Later, as he was paying the bill, his phone, lying screen up on the table, buzzed. The name E3 flashed briefly before he quickly flipped it over, a fraction too fast. "Sorry," he'd mumbled. "Work thing." Sarah didn't comment, but the image of the name, the heart emoji, registered. Eliza? Ellen? Emily? The name itself wasn't important, but the heart was. It wasn't the kind of emoji one typically used for a colleague. A small seed of unease began to sprout in the back of her mind. Mark, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignoring the subtle shift in her demeanor, was already suggesting their next meeting. "There's this independent film I've been wanting to see," he began. Sarah, however, felt a sudden need for distance, for time to process the small unsettling inconsistencies. "I'll have to check my schedule," she said, her smile a little tighter than before. "I'll let you know." Mark, sensing a slight retreat, pushed a little. Don't make me resort to carrier pigeon. She laughed, but it lacked its earlier warmth. I'll text you, she promised, already pulling away. Walking home, Sarah replayed the conversation in her mind. Mark was undeniably charming, but those little things, the jazz club, the phone, his vagueness about his personal life. She wasn't an interrogator, and she didn't want to be suspicious of everyone she met. But her intuition, honed by past disappointments, was sending up a faint warning flare. She decided to do something she rarely did. A little online searching. She knew his full name, Mark Denton, and the graphic design work he'd mentioned. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back in her apartment, she typed his name into a search engine. The initial results were generic, a LinkedIn profile that matched his description of freelance work, a few mentions on obscure design forums. Nothing alarming. Then she tried an image search, and there it was. A photo from a local charity fun run, dated about a year ago. Mark, smiling, arm in arm with a woman with kind eyes and dark, curly hair. The caption read, Mark Denton and his wife, Eliza, supporting the Children's Hospital. Wife. Eliza. The E3 on his phone. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The screen seemed to blur. His wife. He was married. The charming, attentive man from the cafe, the one who spoke of carving his own path, was a liar. A wave of humiliation washed over her, quickly followed by a surge of anger. She thought of his easy laughter, his thoughtful questions, the way he'd looked at her. All of it. A performance. She felt foolish for being taken in, for allowing herself that flicker of hope. He hadn't just omitted information, he had actively constructed a false reality. The dusty artifacts and 18th century pottery shards he'd feigned interest in suddenly felt like metaphors for the layers of deceit he'd presented. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt tainted by the echo of his lies. She closed her laptop with a sharp click. The image of Mark and Eliza burned into her mind. The anger was a hot, churning thing now, mixed with a surprising sense of pity? Not for Mark, but for Eliza. Did she know? Was she at home, trusting while her husband was out charming other women with practiced ease? Sarah paced her small living room, the initial shock giving way to a steely resolve. He wasn't going to get away with this. Not with her. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Mark, meanwhile, was feeling pleased with himself. The date with Sarah had gone even better than he'd hoped, or so he thought. He'd glossed over her slight reserve at the end, attributing it to a natural feminine coyness. He was already planning their next encounter, perhaps something more romantic. He'd even started to fantasize about a weekend away, a complete escape from his real life. At home, Eliza had been quiet, almost withdrawn. He'd barely noticed, caught up in the glow of his secret adventure. He attributed her mood to stress from her own deadlines, a convenient excuse that absolved him of any need for deeper inquiry. He sent Sarah a follow-up text the next morning. Still thinking about that film, and that smile. Let me know when you're free. Days passed with no reply. His initial confidence began to fray. Had he misread her? Said something wrong? He sent another lighter text. Has the common garden snail finally captured your full attention? Still, silence. The lack of response was more unsettling than an outright rejection. It left him in a state of limbo, his carefully constructed fantasy teetering. He found himself checking his phone constantly, a nervous energy thrumming beneath his skin. His interactions with Eliza became more strained, his patience shorter. She, in turn, noticed his increasing irritability, his distractedness. The comfortable silences between them were now filled with an unspoken tension. One evening, while Mark was in the shower, Eliza picked up his phone, intending to look up a recipe he'd mentioned. A notification from a blocked number popped up. Still waiting for that film, Mark? Or should I say, the married Mark Denton? Eliza froze. Married Mark Denton? Her heart began to pound. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number. But the name, she knew, with a sickening certainty that it wasn't a mistake. Her hands trembled as she navigated to his messages, her mind reeling. She didn't even know what she was looking for until she saw the thread with Sarah, coffee. Her blood ran, cold as she read the exchange, the flirtatious banter, the arrangements for dates, the casual lies Mark had spun. Each word was a tiny, sharp betrayal. The man she had built a life with, the man she trusted, was living a double life. The vague excuses, the late nights, the new preoccupation with his phone, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from her grasp, tears welling in her eyes. The sound of the shower stopped. Mark would be out any minute. She had to pull herself together. The hurt was a raw, gaping wound, but beneath it, a cold fury began to smolder. Sarah hadn't replied to Mark's texts, not because she was playing hard to get, but because she was contemplating her next move. The initial rage had cooled into a calculated anger. Simply ghosting him felt unsatisfying. Confronting him alone felt like it would just give him an opportunity to lie further, to try and manipulate his way out of it. She wanted him to understand the gravity of what he'd done, not just to her, but to his wife. That charity fun run photo kept replaying in her mind, Eliza's unsuspecting smile. After a few days of wrestling with her options, she made a decision. It was a long shot, risky even, but it felt like the right thing to do. She searched for Eliza Denton online. It took some digging, but she eventually found a public profile on a local artist collective website. Eliza was a painter, her work vibrant and expressive. There was an email address listed. Sarah stared at it for a long time, her finger hovering over her mouse. What if Eliza already knew? What if she didn't want to know? What if she blamed Sarah? Taking a deep breath, she began to type. "Dear Eliza," she wrote, her words careful, direct. "You don't know me, but my name is Sarah. I believe we've unfortunately been put in a very difficult situation by your husband, Mark." She explained, factually and without embellishment, how she'd met Mark, his claims of being single, their dates, and her eventual discovery of the truth. She attached the screenshot of the fun run photo. "I am so sorry to be the bearer of this news," she concluded. "I can only imagine how painful this must be. I felt you had a right to know. I'm not sure what you will choose to do, but I wanted you to have the truth from someone other than him." She hit send, a wave of trepidation washing over her. Eliza received Sarah's email the morning after her own devastating discovery on Mark's phone. She had barely slept, her mind a torment of replayed memories and imagined betrayals. When she saw Sarah's name in her inbox, her heart lurched. She read the email, her vision blurring with fresh tears, but also with a strange sense of validation. She wasn't going crazy. The blocked number text wasn't a cruel prank. This was real. Sarah's account corroborated everything. The calm, factual tone of the email, devoid of accusation towards Eliza, was strangely comforting. Here was another woman, a stranger, who had also been deceived by Mark. Instead of feeling a rivalry, Eliza felt a bizarre kinship. Sarah hadn't sought revenge, but truth. After the initial shock wore off, a new feeling began to emerge. Resolve. She thought about the years she had invested in her marriage, the trust she had so freely given. Mark hadn't just betrayed her, he'd insulted her intelligence, her loyalty. She replied to Sarah later that day. "Thank you, Sarah. This is incredibly difficult, but I appreciate your honesty more than I can say. I had my own suspicions. You've confirmed them. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I won't let him get away with this. Would you be willing to meet? I think we should talk." Sarah agreed immediately. They met for coffee 2 days later. Not in the trendy cafe where Mark had spun his lies, but in a quiet, unassuming place of Eliza's choosing. The initial meeting was tense, laden with unspoken emotions. Eliza studied Sarah, seeing not a rival, but a woman of quiet strength and integrity. Sarah, in turn, saw the deep pain in Eliza's eyes, but also a flicker of the resilience that shone through in her artwork. They talked for hours. Eliza shared her side, the small hurts, the growing distance, the recent, crushing discoveries. Sarah recounted Mark's calculated charm, the web of deceit he'd woven. As they spoke, the shared experience forged an unlikely bond. The anger was still there, but it was now focused, channeled. "He thinks he's so clever," Eliza said, a bitter twist to her lips. "He thinks he can just play with people's lives and face no consequences." "He underestimates us," Sarah said quietly, and in that moment, an idea began to form. A plan hatched from shared hurt and a desire not for petty revenge, but for a reckoning. A way for Mark to truly see the damage he had caused, to face the reality of his actions in a way he couldn't lie or charm his way out of. The plan was audacious, requiring careful coordination and a certain theatrical flair. Sarah, with her experience in museum archiving and exhibit setup, had a knack for staging. Eliza, the artist, understood symbolism and emotional impact. They decided Mark needed to wake up not just to the truth, but within a carefully constructed embodiment of it. Mark, oblivious to the storm gathering around him, was growing increasingly agitated by Sarah's silence. His texts had gone from cajoling to almost demanding. He was losing control of the narrative, and it unnerved him. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, Sarah replied, "Sorry for the radio silence, Mark. Things have been hectic. But yes, I'd still like to see that film. How about Friday night? My place? We can order in." Mark's relief was immense, quickly followed by a surge of triumph. Her place. This was it. His persistence had paid off. He imagined a cozy evening, wine, the film, and then he pushed aside a fleeting image of Eliza's increasingly worried face. He told himself she'd be fine. She was always fine. He spent the next few days in a state of heightened anticipation, meticulously planning his alibi for Eliza, a late-night work emergency, an urgent deadline that required him to stay at a colleague's studio. He even feigned a few stressed phone calls in her presence to sell the story. Eliza played her part perfectly, expressing concern, offering to bring him food. Her eyes filled with a sorrow he was too self-absorbed to truly see. On Friday evening, Mark dressed with particular care. He chose a dark, expensive-looking sweater, splashed on a bit too much cologne, and checked his reflection multiple times. He felt like a leading man on the verge of his big scene. He drove to the address Sarah had given him, a quiet residential street he didn't recognize. The apartment building was modest, well-kept. He found her unit, number 3B, and knocked, his heart thrumming with anticipation. Sarah opened the door, a soft, welcoming smile on her face. She looked beautiful, wearing a simple silk blouse and dark jeans. "Hi, Mark. Come on in." Her apartment was dimly lit, candles flickering on the coffee table. Soft jazz played in the background. It was exactly as he'd pictured it, a perfect setting for seduction. "Wine?" she offered, gesturing towards 2 glasses and an open bottle on the counter. "Red or white?" "Red, please," he said, his voice a little huskier than he intended. He took the glass she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. He felt a jolt of electricity, or so he imagined. They chatted for a few minutes. Easy, light conversation. He complimented her apartment, her taste in music. He felt completely in control, the master of his own carefully crafted destiny. She was laughing at one of his jokes when she subtly steered him towards the plush armchair near the window. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. "I'll just grab the takeout menus." He sank into the chair, taking a large sip of wine. It was good, smooth, rich. He felt himself relaxing, the tension of the past week melting away. He was here. He had won. Sarah returned with the menus, but he was already feeling a little heavy. The wine, perhaps? Or just the release of anticipation? He took another sip. The room seemed to sway almost imperceptibly. Sarah was saying something about Thai food, her voice sounding a little distant. He tried to focus, but his eyelids felt incredibly heavy. A pleasant lethargy was creeping over him. He smiled, a dopey, contented smile. "Sounds good," he managed to slur, just before his head lolled to the side and the world went dark. The last thing he vaguely registered was Sarah's face, no longer smiling, but watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, an expression that was neither welcoming nor seductive, but something far more complex, something almost pitying. Then, nothing. A throbbing in his temples was the first sensation, then a dry, cottony mouth. Mark groaned, trying to pry his eyelids open. They felt glued shut. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was Sarah's apartment, the wine. Had he drunk too much? Slowly, reluctantly, his eyes opened to a blurry, unfamiliar scene. He blinked, trying to focus. He was lying on something soft, a sofa, he thought, but it wasn't Sarah's sofa. As his vision cleared, a wave of profound disorientation washed over him. He was in a room, a living room, but it was wrong. Everything was slightly off, like a dream where familiar places are subtly distorted. The wallpaper was a pattern he vaguely recognized, but the colors were too bright, almost garish. The furniture, a faded floral armchair, a worn wooden coffee table, a bookshelf filled with old paperbacks. It was all eerily familiar, yet starkly alien. It was like a stage set, a flimsy imitation of a real place. Panic began to claw at his throat. He sat up, his head spinning. He looked around wildly. Then he saw them. Seated opposite him, in two simple wooden chairs, as if they were an audience and he, the unwilling performer, were Eliza and Sarah. Eliza's face was pale, her eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness, yet underscored by an unyielding resolve. Sarah sat beside her, her expression calm, observant, her hands resting in her lap. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, with years of deceit and moments of betrayal. Mark stared, his mind struggling to reconcile this bizarre tableau with the seductive evening he'd anticipated. "Eliza," he croaked, his voice raspy. "Sarah, what is this? Where are we?" Eliza spoke, her voice low but clear, cutting through the silence. "We're in a place you might remember, Mark, or perhaps a place you've tried very hard to forget." She gestured vaguely around the room. "It's a recreation, our first apartment, the one where we made so many promises." Mark's blood ran cold. He looked around again, truly seeing it now. The cheap print above the sofa, the bookshelf he'd built with his own hands, the slight water stain on the ceiling he'd always meant to fix. It was a painstakingly crafted replica, a ghost of their past brought to life. "But why?" he stammered, his bravado crumbling, replaced by a sickening dread. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Because, Mark, we felt it was time for you to see the full picture, not just the curated version you present to the world or to women you meet in coffee shops." Her voice was even, without malice, but with an undeniable edge of steel. "We thought a trip down memory lane might be illuminating." On the coffee table between them, Mark now noticed a collection of items. His wedding ring, gleaming innocently, printouts of his text exchanges with Sarah, the fun-run photo of him and Eliza, her smile so bright, so trusting, and a small, simple gold locket he'd given Eliza on their first anniversary, something he hadn't seen her wear in years. Each object was like a nail hammered into the coffin of his lies. His internal monologue was a chaotic scream of panic and dawning, horrifying comprehension. There was no charming his way out of this, no glib excuse that would suffice. He was trapped, exposed, his carefully constructed double life laid bare under the harsh, unforgiving light of this bizarre, staged reality. He felt a flush of shame so intense it was physically painful, starting in his gut and spreading like fire to his face. He wanted the floor to swallow him. He was on stage, the spotlight burning, his performance over, the applause replaced by a damning, profound silence. I don't know what to say," Mark finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't meet their eyes. The weight of their combined gaze was unbearable. He looked down at his hands, twisting them in his lap. The man who, just hours before, had felt like a master manipulator, a suave conqueror, now felt like a pathetic, exposed child. Eliza's voice, when she spoke again, was laced with a sorrow that cut him deeper than any anger could have. That's the problem, isn't it, Mark? You never know what to say. Or rather, you always know what to say to get what you want, but never what's true, or what's kind. She picked up the gold locket. Do you remember this? You said it symbolized our unbreakable bond. Her laugh was brittle, devoid of humor. It seems bonds are more breakable than you thought, Sarah added, her tone still measured. You built a fantasy, Mark, for me, for yourself. But fantasies have a way of shattering when they collide with reality, and the reality is you hurt people. You hurt Eliza, you disrespected me, you took her trust and my willingness to be open and treated them like they were disposable. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to find some justification. But the words wouldn't come. Every excuse that sprang to mind sounded hollow, pathetic, even to his own ears. The meticulously crafted set around him was a physical manifestation of his duplicity, each detail a testament to the life he had betrayed and the lies he had told. He thought of the casual ease with which he'd removed his ring, the thrill he'd felt weaving his fabricated stories. Now, all he felt was a profound, nauseating self-loathing. I'm sorry, he mumbled, the words feeling inadequate, almost insulting in their simplicity. Sorry for what, Mark? Eliza pressed, her gaze unwavering. Sorry you got caught? Or sorry for what you did? That was the question, wasn't it? He looked up then, forcing himself to meet Eliza's eyes, then Sarah's. In their faces, he saw not just anger and hurt, but a kind of exhausted disappointment. They weren't seeking vengeance, not really. They were seeking an acknowledgement, a genuine understanding of the pain he had inflicted. And in that moment, something within him shifted. The shame was still there, suffocating him, but beneath it, a flicker of genuine remorse, a horrifying clarity about the selfishness of his actions, began to dawn. It wasn't just about being caught, it was about the person he had become, the casual cruelty he had been capable of. The silence stretched, heavy and accusatory. Mark finally found his voice, though it was hoarse, choked with emotion. I'm sorry for everything. For lying. For betraying your trust, Eliza. For deceiving you, Sarah. There's no excuse. I was selfish. And weak. And I broke. Something I can never fully repair. He looked at Eliza, tears welling in his own eyes now, unbidden, humiliating. I took you for granted. I took us for granted. Eliza listened, her expression unreadable. Sarah watched him, a flicker of something unidentifiable in her eyes. There were no triumphant shouts, no dramatic denunciations, just the quiet, heavy weight of truth settling in the room. After what felt like an eternity, Eliza stood up. I don't know if sorry is enough, Mark. I don't know what is. But this charade, it's over. She walked towards the makeshift door of the set. You can find your own way out. The real door is that way. She pointed towards an actual exit at the side of the large warehouse-like space they were in, a community theater Sarah had managed to secure for the night. Sarah stood as well. She looked at Mark, a long, searching look. I hope for your sake, and for the sake of anyone else whose path you might cross, that you learn something from this, something real. And then she too turned and walked away, leaving Mark alone in the surreal, symbolic wreckage of his own making. He sat there for a long time, the silence of the empty theater pressing in on him. The carefully constructed set of his first apartment felt like a mausoleum. He looked at the objects on the table, each one a painful reminder. He picked up his wedding ring. It felt cold, alien in his hand. He didn't put it back on. Eventually he stood, his legs unsteady. He walked out of the set, out of the theater, and into the pre-dawn chill. The city was quiet, indifferent. His car was where he'd left it, a stark reminder of his earlier, arrogant anticipation. The drive home was a blur of self-recrimination and a dawning, terrifying uncertainty about his future. The resolution was not swift, nor was it easy. Eliza didn't throw him out immediately. Instead, she insisted on counseling, both individual and marriage. though she made it clear that her participation was not a guarantee of reconciliation, but an exploration of whether there was anything left to salvage, and for her own understanding. Mark, stripped of his deceptions, was forced to confront the hollow core of his dissatisfaction, the entitlement that had led him down this path. He had to face the man he saw in the mirror, and he didn't like him. The therapy was brutal. He had to unpack years of suppressed frustrations, insecurities, and the gradual erosion of his own integrity. He had to learn to communicate honestly, not just with Eliza, but with himself. There were no quick fixes, no easy epiphanies. It was a slow, painful process of rebuilding, not just a marriage, but his own character. Sarah, for her part, found a sense of closure. She had stood up for herself, had refused to be a silent victim of his deceit. The experience, though painful, reinforced her own values and her resolve to seek genuine connections. She moved on, her observational skills perhaps a little sharper, her heart a little more guarded, but ultimately open to the possibility of real love, built on honesty. Months later, the path for Mark and Eliza was still uncertain. The raw wound of betrayal had begun to scar over, but the trust, once shattered, was a fragile thing. Mark was different, quieter, more reflective. He was making a genuine effort, not to win Eliza back with grand gestures, but to become a man worthy of her respect, whether they stayed together or not. He'd started volunteering at a local community center, finding a quiet satisfaction in helping others, a stark contrast to his previous self-absorption. The inspirational uplift wasn't in a fairy tale reconciliation, but in the painful, authentic journey towards self-awareness and accountability. Eliza found a new strength in herself, a clarity about what she wanted and deserved. Whether her future included Mark remained to be seen, but she was no longer defined by his actions, but by her own resilience. The waking up in that staged room had been a brutal catalyst, but it had forced a reckoning that, in the end, offered a sliver of hope. Not necessarily for the marriage, but for the individuals involved to find a more honest path forward. Justice had been served, not through punishment, but through the unavoidable, agonizing confrontation with truth. And for Mark, the long road to potential redemption had just begun, a journey he would have to walk one difficult, honest step at a time.